Hi guys, I'm Josh Tofani. I'm one of the training coordinators at Deep Well Services. Today we are going to be going over a tubing swivel rebuild. Okay, before we jump into it, we'll grab the tools and supplies needed for the rebuild. This includes a couple of swivel bearings, dust seal, rope packing, some Teflon tape, punches, a 1/4 inch Allen key, some picks, a hammer, and a 4x4 block of wood. Also, you need to grab some grease, WD-40, and some rags. You want to start by securing your swivel on top of a 1502 thread stump. A lot of our catwalks have these built onto the side for our rebuilds. If you don't have one on your catwalk, you can also use the iron rack. Once you have your swivel secured to the stump, hook your forklift up to the top of the lifting eye on top of the swivel with a sling and a shackle. Then we're able to loosen off the 3/4 inch Allen screws in the swivel housing. Those are just your set screws. You can unscrew the swivel housing from the top sub, and then we are able to separate the two halves by lifting the top sub out with a forklift. Now that we have the swivel separated in two pieces, we can go ahead and remove the retaining ring that holds the dogs in place on the wing half. After the retaining ring is out, the dogs will fall out. Pull the wing half off, followed by the retaining ring. After the wing half's off, the mandrel will just slide right out the top of the swivel. Okay, once the mandrel's out, you can go ahead and pull off your packing gland off the mandrel. This is a good time to inspect your O-rings. There's an O-ring on the inside and the outside of the packing gland. If there's any scars, cuts, abrasions to those, you want to go ahead and replace those at this time. We'll also take a look at our mandrel. If there's any scarring, pitting, any damage to that, we will be replacing that as well. Okay, we can go ahead and remove the old bearings from our housing here. Easiest way to do that is just flip this thing upside down. Take one of your punches, your hammer, gently tap around the bearings. They are pretty tight fit, so try to tap evenly around till they work loose and they fall down for you. Okay, you can take the old bearings out, get a good inspection on them, turn them around. If you hear any grinding, feel any binding up, then that's an indication that you'll have to go ahead and replace the bearings. If the bearings are still freely moving, there's no damage to them, then it's okay to go ahead and reuse those. After you got your bearings out, we'll go ahead and tackle the dust seal, or grease seal as it's called. It's your seal on the bottom here. Easiest way to get this out if it's damaged, take a couple 4x4 blocks, set your housing on top. Make sure it's spaced out enough to where the sides of the seal can clear it. Take a 4x4 block, center it right down the middle, and give her some taps on the top. Seal will pop right out the bottom. You'll see one side is flat and the other side is dished out. As we take our new one, the flat side, we'll be putting that out. So go ahead and turn your swivel housing back over again. Rub a little grease on the outside. And there is very little clearance getting this new seal in, so you want to evenly tap it around using a wood block as a spacer so you don't crush it. After your dust seal is seated in place, you can go ahead and flip your housing back over. Okay, give the inside a light coat of grease so your bearings can slide down into place. You also want to take some grease in your hand. And I like to go ahead and just pack my bearings. That way they're full of grease starting right off the bat. Just roll your bearing around while pressing the grease into the bearing. Okay, after she's all greased up, the bearing goes into the swivel housing with the thick center ring facing up. You may have to give it a few taps with a 4x4 block evenly around to get her seated down into place. Once she's seated, repeat the process with the second bearing. The second bearing goes in the same way with the thick center ring up. Again, we'll give it a couple blocks just to make sure she's seated down there correctly. A couple taps with the block. Okay, let's go ahead and reinstall our mandrel into the swivel housing. I went ahead and put a light area of grease, light coated grease around right here where it's going to be contacting the bearings. That way it doesn't get stuck in there. Okay, then we can go ahead and throw our retaining ring back on. Our wing half. And put our dogs back into place. Once your dogs are back into place, use your pick again to get your retaining ring started into the groove of your dogs. Now that our swivel housing half is all rebuilt, we'll go ahead and concentrate on the top sub. Coming over to our top sub next, you want to remove all the old rope packing pieces, all your packing spacers and the brass. Take a look at your inside and make sure it's not scarred up or damaged in any way. If it looks good, we'll go ahead and clean this out real well, some WD-40, some rags, and then we can go ahead and lightly coat the inside with some grease. Okay, what I have here is our rope packing, all separated, spread out. These pieces I've already wrapped in Teflon on the ends. What that does is help keep the ends from fraying, especially when you're putting it back together. It could really catch on the mandrel trying to put the two pieces together and make it tricky. So we just take a little bit of the Teflon tape, wrap it around of the end of the rope packing. Same thing on the other side. You don't have to get real crazy with it, just enough to keep all those frays in there. Then you want to go ahead and repeat that process for the 6 pieces of rope packing. The brass, we want to go ahead and clean that up real well. Make sure that it's not scarred up, chewed up, deformed in any way. If it is, go ahead and replace that now. If it's good to go ahead and reuse again, then we'll grease it up and put it back into the top sub. Okay, reassembling our rope packing assembly. We're going to start by putting our large brass in the top first. I did give this a light coat of grease, but I like to coat everything else going in as well. Push it until it fully seats down at the bottom. After the brass piece is seated, you want to install 6 pieces of rope packing, each one with a green spacer in between. You want to make sure as you're installing the rope packing, you're alternating where the brakes are. So I'll put the first one in, I'll rotate it 180 degrees for the next one. 90 degrees off for the next one. Continue to alternate them, the seams all the way up. Be sure when you're putting the rope packing in there, you're not pushing it down in there real hard. That'll make it compress and that'll make it a lot harder to get the mandrel in later. Okay, so our 6 rope packing with the green spaces are in. Go ahead and put my small brass on the top there. Okay, make sure you give everything a nice coat of grease on the inside here. Grease up the O-rings on the packing gland. Then place the packing gland on top. Again, don't push it down. If you compress all that rope, it'll be a lot harder getting the mandrel down into place. All right, now we can go ahead and reinstall the mandrel and housing back onto the top sub. Try to be easy as you do this and just finesse it down on in. Once it makes contact, go ahead and thread the housing on. If it's too difficult to turn by hand, you can also use a punch in one of the holes. Work it around like that. After you snug it down, make sure you back it off just a hair so it's not extremely tight. You'll notice you have a small gap there. That is normal. That leaves us a little bit of an adjustment while the swivel's breaking in to adjust it upside in the basket. All right, then we'll wrap her up by snugging up our 3/4 inch set screws. Then we can go ahead and give that greaser a couple pumps of grease. No need to overdo it. The only thing that grease is for the bearings. That brings us to the end of our tubing swivel rebuild. If you have any questions, comments, and concerns, please feel free to reach out to myself or any other trainers in the training department.